Heaven Official's Blessing. Guan by Mo Xiang Dong Xiu. Read by Plant Bones. Chapter 9, Part 1. Dallying Hualien. Nightfall in the Sinner's Pit. The more adamant the mud-face was, the more alarmed Xielian became. Everyone stand back, don't go near him, and don't listen to a single word he says. The crowd dispersed in a panic. The mud-face continued to chuckle. Don't leave. There's no need to be like this. I'm human too. I won't hurt you. Oh, you're mistaken. You look nothing like a human, Xielian thought. Just then, something unexpected happened. One of the merchants snuck back toward the field, probably thinking that he still had to bring back some herb for the wounded. But when he bent down to pick up the ferns he had dropped in fright earlier, the mud-face twisted and spotted him with a glint in its spinning eyes. Oh no, Xielian thought, rushing toward the man. Don't pick that up. Come back. But it was too late. The mud-face opened its mouth and a long, blood-red thing slithered out. What a long tongue. Xielian grabbed the merchant by his collar and hustled backward with him in tow, but the tongue flew out, was freakishly long, and forced its way right into the merchant's ear. Xielian felt the body in his grip convulse violently. The merchant's limbs writhed nonstop, and the man let out a short, agonized scream before falling to the ground. That long tongue drug out a large chunk of something bloody from his ear and brought it back to the mud-face's mouth. The mud-face happily chewed and cackled, his laugh so disturbingly loud it filled the entire palace grounds. So good, so good, so delicious, so delicious, so delicious. I was hungry, so hungry. His voice was sharp and shrill, his eyes bloodshot, horrible and disgusting to the extreme. This man who had been buried for over 50 years in the ground of an evil-filled kingdom had already been molded into its soil and became something other than human. Xielian loosened his grip on the deceased merchant, his entire arm shaking. He was about to strike the repulsive monster when the mud-face screamed again. General! General! They're here! They're here! A deafening cry, more savage than that of a beast, echoed in this distance. A dark shadow dropped from the sky and landed heavily in front of Xielian. The entire palace grounds quaked on its landing. When it slowly stood up, its enormous shadow enveloped the entire group. This man was truly much too big. His face was as grim as steel, his expression ferocious and turbulent, like that of a beast. He was at least 3 meters tall, clad in leather armor on his shoulders and chest. Rather than a man, one could say he was more like a walking wolf. Behind him, more and more similar forms appeared. 1, 2, 3. Over 10 of those men jumped off the roofs of the palace and surrounded them. Each of these men was as large as a horse, built like a beast, with sharp-toothed mace on his shoulders. They might as well have been werewolves. When they circled around the intruders in the garden, it was like a large steel cage had fallen upon them. The soldiers of Banyue. These soldiers emanated a dark aura and were undoubtedly no longer alive. Xielian was tense and held Rue in position, ready to attack. However, when Baiyue's soldiers saw them, they didn't rush to kill. Instead, they raised their heads and roared with crazed laughter, howling in a foreign language. The sound of their words was ghastly, guttural and heavy, with tongue rolling. That was the language of Baiyue. Although it had been 200 years and Xielian had pretty much forgotten the language, he did review it with Sanlang earlier in the general's tomb, and the words uttered by these soldiers were loud, simple, and vulgar, so they weren't difficult to understand. He heard the soldiers call the first man general. Their conversation was filled with phrases like "take them away" and "won't kill for now." Xielian took a deep breath and forced himself to relax. He said in a low voice, "Everyone, don't panic. These Baiyue soldiers won't kill us for the time being. It seems they want to take us somewhere else. Don't do anything rash. I can't guarantee that I can beat them in a fight. We'll figure this out as we go." It was clear that the soldiers would be hard to fight, each of them rougher than the next. Even with Rue in hand, suffocating one would probably take a bit of time, never mind 10. With mortals with him, Cielian couldn't do anything bold and could only remain vigilant and protect them the best he could. Sanlang didn't say anything, and the others had already lost their nerve. Even if they wanted to do something rash, they wouldn't know how, so they could only nod tearfully. Next to them, the mud-face screamed again, "General, General, please let me out! I detained your enemies. Let me go home! I want to go home!" Seeing the Bayeux soldiers, the mud-face became hysterical, screaming and crying, blabbering nonsense with some Banyue words mixed in, no doubt learned from the many years spent buried here. The massive 9-foot man called General seemed to find the squirming mud-face deeply disgusting and swung his mace toward it. He smashed the face into a bloody mess, the teeth of his mace piercing the brain. When he pulled his mace up again, the entire body was pulled out with it, fulfilling his wish of "let me out." However, the body that was unearthed was not a full human body, but a chilling skeleton. The merchant screamed in terror. The mud-face, bloody after crumpling off the mace, seemed to also freeze in fear after seeing his own body. He sucked in a sharp breath. What's this? What's this?" "It's your body," Cielian reminded him, seeing that the mud-face was numb in disbelief. It was easy to figure out. The man had been buried in the desert for more than 50 or 60 years. His body had fertilized the Sanue ferns until they cleaned him of his flesh and only left bones. "How can this be?" the mud-face cried. "My body isn't like this! This is not my body!" His voice was incomparably shrill, and he was horrifying and a tragic sight. Cielian shook his head, but Sanlang sneered. "Now you're not used to your own body. What was that thing that came out of your mouth earlier? You didn't think that was odd?" The mud-face countered immediately. "That wasn't odd. It was just a tongue that's a bit longer than average." There was nothing but mockery in Sanlang's face. "Yeah, sure. A little longer, right?" "That's right," the mud-face cried. "It's only a little bit longer. It's just because I spent decades trying to live off insects, forcing my tongue to extend, that it must become how it came, like this." When he was first buried in the ground, perhaps he was still alive, and in order to survive, he had done his best to extend his tongue to eat the flying insects and creepy crawlies. Then, as he gradually became less and less human, his tongue also became longer and longer, and the food he ate also moved from insects to much more terrifying things. However, because he had been buried underground for so many years, unable to see the state of his body, he was unable to accept the truth and refused to believe that he was no longer human. The mud-face kept trying to argue. "There are plenty of people who have long tongues, not just me." Sunlung smiled, and Cielian felt a chill watching him. This youth's smile really gave off a sense of cruelty, like he was on the verge of ripping off someone's face. "Do you think you're still a human?" Sunlung questioned. The mud-face felt a sense of danger at the question, and suddenly became agitated. Of course I'm human! I'm human!" The mud-face screamed and tried to move its white, bony limbs all at once, as if trying to crawl away. Finally unearthed, he was mad with joy, cackling, "I'm going home! I can go home!" Crack! The Bayeux general finally had enough of the monster's shrill cries. In a split second, he crushed the bones in one stomp, killing any more of his cries of "I am human." After trampling the irritated face, the general roared at the soldiers. The Bayeux soldiers all raised their maces and, growling at Cielian's group, started herding them out of the palace. Cielian walked up front with Sanlang still following close behind. Despite being Despite being ushered by ruthless Bayeux soldiers, the youth's step was still light and casual, as if he were taking a stroll. Cielian had been hoping to find the chance to talk to him, and after a while, when the Bayeux soldiers went back to conversing among themselves, he spoke to Sanlang in a low voice. Those Banyue soldiers call their leader general. I wonder who it is. As expected when posed a question, Sunlung still answered. At the time when the kingdom of Banyue fell, there was only one general. His name, translated, is Keimo. Keimo? As in milestone? Xiaolian wondered at the odd name. That's right, Sunlung said. Apparently it was because he was awfully weak when he was young and was often bullied. He rallied and built up his strength by training with large milestones, which is how he got his name. Xiaolian couldn't resist thinking. Then he could have just as easily been named Dali for brawn. Sunlung continued. Legends have it that Keimo was the strongest warrior in the history of Baiyu, 3 meters tall and extremely powerful. He was the loyal supporter of the state preceptor. Even after death? Is he taking us to the Baiyu state preceptor now, then? Xiaolian asked. Perhaps, Sunlung replied. If there were more Baiyu soldiers here, how could they escape? Who knew how Nanfeng, who had lured the lured the other two away, was doing? The Xianyue fern was in their hands, but how are they going to deliver the ferns to the wounded within 24 hours? Xialian contemplated as he walked and soon noticed that General Keimo was leading them to a remote place at the far end of the city. When they stopped, Xialian looked up. A colossal yellow earthen wall stood before him like a giant. Their destination was the Sinner's Pit. Although Xialian had lived in Banyue area for some time, he'd rarely gone into town and had never gone near the Sinner's Pit. Seeing this close, Xialian's heart started pounding for some reason. Sorry about that. The yellow-earthed walls had a set of stairs along the outside. While they slowly climbed the crude stairs, Xialian scrutinized the pit and tried to look with his human eyes into the depths until he finally understood why his heart was pounding. It wasn't because of thoughts of how this place was of torture and cruelty, and it wasn't worry about everyone getting pushed in. He was feeling the palpitations of a very powerful array at work. Someone had purposefully set up an incredibly powerful array using the Sinner's Pit surrounding terrain and structure. And this array only had one purpose: to prevent the fallen from ever resurfacing. What that meant was, even if a rope or a ladder was sent down into the pit, whoever tried to climb from the bottom would get cut off halfway up and thrown right back down. Without outwardly showing his intent, Xialian used the wall as a support to climb the stairs. After walking for a stretch, he determined the material of the wall. He discovered that while it looked like it was made of earth, it was actually incomparably hard stone, probably enforced with a layer of magic. It'd undoubtedly be very difficult to break. When they reached the end of the stairs and came to the top of the pit, standing along the wall's eaves, the only word to describe the sight was awful. That's it. It inspired awe. The whole of the Sinner's Pit was formed by 4 great walls surrounding it. Each wall was over 100 meters long, over 60 meters high, and over 1 meter thick, the structure standing solemnly tall. At the top of each wall there was nothing, neither gazebos nor railings. Within the enclosure, there was a deep abyss without a bottom in sight. With the growing night, there was only blackness and a chilling smell of blood wafting up from below. No one dared look down while walking along the railingless eaves, tens of meters above the ground. After a while, they could see the pole that stood in the center, and attached to that pole was a hanging corpse, the same one they had spotted before. The corpse was small, a black-clad girl, her clothing tattered and head bowed. Xielian knew that this pole had been used specifically for hanging criminals that deserved shame and humiliation. The prison guards would usually strip the criminals of their clothing and hang the bodies naked. The criminals would die from starvation or dehydration, and after the death, the corpse would be left to flail in the wind, scorching under the sun and rot in the rain. When the corpse rotted completely through, it would fall into the pit itself. That sort of death was an exceedingly ugly sight. The corpse of that girl didn't seem to be rotten, so it must not have been long since she died. Perhaps it was a local girl that the soldiers captured. What a cruel and vulgar thing to do to a young girl. Ajiao, Tianxing, and the others' faces blanched at the sight and paused in their steps, afraid to go forward. Keimo didn't force them onward either, but turned to the pit and let out a long cry. Why is he yelling? Xielian wondered, but his question was soon answered. From the bottom of the dark pit came wave after wave of roars in response to the cry, like predatory beasts, like monsters, like tsunamis, hundreds upon thousands, deafening to the ear. The walls trembled with the noise, making those standing on the eaves lose their balance. Xielian could clearly hear rocks and debris falling within. Only criminals were thrown into the sinner's pit. Were those the souls of the criminals answering Keimo? Keimo roared again, and Xielian paid more attention, listening. This time, Keimo wasn't making a meaningless noise. He wasn't cursing either. Instead, he was giving encouragement. Xielian was very sure he heard the words, "my brothers." After roaring, Keimo turned to the soldiers watching Xielian and the others and shouted another command. Xielian understood. Keimo had said, "Just throw in two and detain the rest." The others might not have understood what was being said, but the intent of those soldiers was not hard to guess. Everyone looked as pale as ghosts. Xielian saw that a couple couldn't even stand upright anymore, shaking from fear. He stepped forward and in a small voice said, "Don't worry. If anything happens, I will go forward first." Xielian thought that if they all must fall, he might as well be the first one to check things out. It couldn't be worse than venomous snakes and beasts or menacing ghosts. He couldn't die from the fall, from getting beaten, from bites, from poison. As long as it wasn't lava or fire or some pool of corpse-dissolving water, it shouldn't be too terrible when he jumped down. Besides, he had Rue with him. Even if he might not manage to escape the array, he could still use it to catch others who fall after him. Keimo had said, "Detain the rest," meaning that most of the others should be safe temporarily. After all, it wasn't easy hunting for prey in the Gobi Desert, so they should savor them instead of eating everyone in one go. Xielian's mind was clear. But who knew there was someone next to him that couldn't wait any longer? Ever since they reached the top of the sinner's pit, everyone, besides Senlong, who looked like nothing was out of the ordinary, was trembling, but especially Aziao. He must have thought that if he was about to die, he might as well go down fighting. He clenched his fists and suddenly revolted. He went charging toward Keimo with his head down. The charge looked like Aziao was ready to perish, but wanted to take Keimo down with him by knocking them both into the pit. Even though Keimo was was the bigger of the two, strong like a steel tower, he got pushed back 3 steps from Aziao's desperation. He roared in outrage and immediately threw the young man in. Everyone started screaming when they saw Aziao plunge into the dark abyss, and Xielian called out after him too, "Aziao!" From deep within the bottomless pit, there came a roaring cheer, and then the sound of cruel ripping of flesh, like fierce ghosts fighting over a meal. It was easy to understand from hearing those noises that the young man Aziao would never survive. Xielian was dumbstruck by this development. He had been suspicious that Aziao was a subordinate of the Baiyue state preceptor, purposefully leading the travelers to the ruins. He also suspected that he was the one who was here 50 or 60 years ago. But the young man ended up being the first killed. How could he possibly survive that jump? Could he be faking his own death? But now that they were all captured by the Banyue soldiers, if Axiao really was the state preceptor's subordinate, he'd have the upper hand and could gloriously reveal his true identity. Certainly he didn't need to do anything extra, like faking his own death before their eyes. It was completely meaningless. But then, why did Axiao rush Keimo? Wasn't that an equally meaningless death? Xielian's thoughts were in knots again. While the Banyue soldiers decided on the next human to push down, Keimo sized them up and pointed at Tiansheng. Another Banyue soldier opened his large palm and reached out to capture the boy. Tiansheng screamed in terror. Ah! Take me! I'm... Without any more time to think, Xialian stepped forward. Please wait, General. Hearing him speak, and in the Banyue tongue no less, shock appeared on Keimo's dark-skinned face. You know how to speak our tongue? Where are you from? I'm from the Central Plains, Xialian replied. He would have been fine with lying that he was also a citizen of Banyue, but that wouldn't have worked. With how rusty his Banyue dialect was, his lie would fall apart after conversing with Keimo for too long. Besides, it was also obvious from his appearance that he was a man from the Central Plains. The people of Banyue detested liars more than anything, so if Xielian was found out, the result would be much worse. Central Plains, Keimo questioned. Descendants of Yong'an? No, Xielian replied. The kingdom of Yong'an has long since fallen, so there is no more Yong'an now. But to those of Banyue, all who came from the Central Plains were pretty much the same, relatives of the descendants of Yong'an. The Banyue were annihilated by the army of Yong'an, so the moment they heard where Xielian was from, Keimo's dark expression flashed with rage. Many of the Banyue soldiers also started growling, cursing vulgarly at him. Xielian listened, but it wasn't much more than despicable. Liar, and throw him down! Xielian couldn't care less. Keimo demanded, Our kingdom disappeared in the Gobi over 200 years ago. You are not of our people. Why do you know our language? Who are you? Xielian couldn't help but steal a glance at the calm youth behind him, mentally hoping that if his lies fell apart later, maybe he could shamelessly ask Sunlung to save him. He cleared his throat and was ready to start jabbering nonsense, when another series of enraged growls sounded from below. It seemed that whatever was down in the pit had finished ripping Axiao apart, but they were still hungry for more, and cried out to convey their thirst for fresh blood. Keimo raised his hand, ready to have Tiansheng thrown over. Xielian spoke up. General, please take me first. Keimo must have never heard anyone request to go first before, and his eyes bulged like balls. He demanded in disbelief. You go first? Why? Xielian couldn't tell him the truth and say it was because he wasn't scared. He thought for a second and came up with a logical answer. General, they are innocent passing merchants. There's even a child among them. Keimo sneered. When your Yong'an army annihilated my kingdom, do you think we did not also have innocent merchants and children? The fall of the kingdom of Banyue was over 200 years ago, and since then countless dynasties had come and gone. However, these were the dead for whom time had stopped. Hatred and grudges would not fade with the changing times. Keimo continued. You're very suspicious. I'll need to question you. You are not going down. Throw in a different one. There was no helping it. Xielian was ready to jump if all else failed anyways. However, behind him, Sunlung stepped forward. Xielian's heart lurched and he looked back. With his arms crossed, the youth was nonchalantly looking into the dark, bottomless sinner's pit with an intrigued air. This wasn't a good sign. Xielian called out, Sunlung? Sunlung looked over at the sound of his call and smiled softly. It's fine. He took another step forward and was teetering dangerously on the brink. Both Xielian's head and heart started pounding. He called out again, Wait, Sunlung, don't move. At such a height, at the very edge of the pit, the hem of the youth's red clothes danced in the night breeze. Sunlun glanced at him again with a smile. Don't be scared. You come back here first. Come back here and I won't be scared, Xialian said. Don't worry. I'm just going to leave for a bit. We'll see each other again soon, Sunlun said. Don't! Before he finished, the boy took another step forward, his arms still crossed. Then with a light leap, he instantly vanished into unfathomable darkness.